The backstage corridor felt smaller than it ever had, the air heavy with tension, and the faint smell of sweat, metal, and lingering anxiety. Taehyung's hand gripped his microphone so tightly his knuckles whitened, pulse hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape. Outside, the echoes of cheering fans were muffled, distant, a stark contrast to the silence pressing against him from every side inside the narrow hallway. He had always thrived under pressure, on stage, under lights, but tonight, this was different. Tonight, the pressure came from shadows, from faces he knew he couldn't simply charm or disarm. The door slammed behind him with a finality that made the walls shudder. Before Taehyung could react, a voice he knew too well whispered sharply, "You need to tell us the truth right now." The words were calm, professional, but the weight behind them was crushing. He lifted his head slowly, taking in the figures of executives standing rigid in their tailored suits, eyes unreadable but commanding. One staff member clutched a clipboard so tightly her fingers trembled. Another seemed frozen, as if instinct warned her she was witnessing something she was never meant to see. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, washing the corridor in a cold, almost clinical glare, casting hard shadows over faces taut with authority. Taehyung's throat burned, not from singing or shouting, not from performing. This was something deeper, something primal. His stage persona, the controlled, unshakable mask he wore for millions, felt like it was cracking from within. "I didn't think you'd confront me like this," he said quietly, voice roughened by fatigue and fear he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. Fear, maybe, relief possibly, or both. For years he had trained himself to endure. Pain had been a constant companion, physical injuries ignored, insomnia laughed off, emotional scars buried beneath lyrics and late-night studio sessions. He had learned to push, to pretend control was an innate quality he could force into existence. But this confrontation, wasn't about schedules, contracts, or public image. It was about a truth he had hidden so meticulously that even he sometimes believed it no longer existed. One of the executives stepped closer, the click of polished shoes echoing against the concrete floor. "We've reviewed everything," he said. "The files, the messages, the late-night studio bookings that don't match the official schedule. We want to hear it from you." Taehyung's gaze fell to the floor where a thin crack ran through the concrete, a silent fault line mirroring the one opening inside him. His shoulders began to tremble, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The staff member gasped softly, gripping her clipboard as if it could anchor her to reality. "I was trying to protect them," Taehyung said, words tumbling out faster now, uncontrolled. "I thought if I carried it alone, it wouldn't reach anyone else." "Protect who?" someone asked sharply. And then it happened. His knees buckled, the microphone clattering to the floor with a hollow clang. Tears came, unbidden and unstoppable, streaking down his face. This wasn't the polite, composed cry people imagined. This was raw, shaking, violent, like something long suppressed being torn free. "I'm tired," he whispered, voice breaking. "I've been tired for a long time." The room seemed to hold its breath. Memories surged. A cramped studio at 2 a.m., fingers numb from overuse, staring at unfinished lyrics convinced he would fail. Moments of physical and emotional exhaustion he had swallowed and ignored. Promises made to himself to never appear weak, only to realize the weight of silence had eroded him from the inside. The executives watched, not with judgment but with a strange, uncomfortable recognition. Taehyung was not performing. He was confessing, exposing himself in a way that terrified and stunned everyone in the room. "No one ever expects the truth," he said, voice steadier now though still raw, "because the truth is messy. It doesn't fit into reports or press releases." He wiped at his tears with the back of his hand, leaving faint smears on his skin. His eyes, usually guarded and precise, were open now, too open, and the staff witnessed not just vulnerability but honesty without armor. "I kept writing," he continued, words deliberate, "because writing was the only place I could put everything without destroying the people I love. But some stories don't stay on paper, they leak. And when they do, everyone thinks it's scandal instead of a symptom." The executives exchanged subtle glances. This was not the defensive denial they had prepared for. This was confession without spectacle, pain without performance. "I know the consequences," he said quietly. "I've always known, but if you're asking whether I regret it," he paused, eyes red, expression painfully honest. "No, I regret not asking for help sooner." The hallway felt unusually long as Taehyung stepped away from the room where his composure had finally shattered. Each step carried the weight of the confession, dragging the raw truth behind him like a chain he could no longer ignore. The distant roar of the arena pressed against his ribs with the same force that the confrontation had left behind. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked, deliberately, acknowledging the fractures in himself that had once been invisible to everyone else, even to him. Namjoon's voice pulled him from his thoughts, cautious but threaded with concern. "Taehyung, what did they say to you?" He turned slowly, the familiar warmth in Namjoon's tone a thin balm against the lingering sting of the meeting. The other members lingered nearby, pretending not to watch but failing miserably. Their eyes, sharp and searching, mirrored the tension in his chest. "They asked questions," he said, keeping it brief. Namjoon's brow furrowed. "You were crying," he observed, and it wasn't accusation, it was concern laid bare. "Yeah," Taehyung whispered, voice almost breaking again. "I was." Silence fell, heavy and loaded, the kind that stretches and trembles in the space between words. He had mastered the art of controlled vulnerability for the cameras, for the stage, for the fans. But crying like this in front of executives, staff, and the people he trusted most was exposure without armor. "What's going on?" Jungkook asked, voice low, careful. "This isn't just company stuff, is it?" Taehyung shook his head, eyes dropping to the floor. "It's not," he admitted. The stage persona, the flawless mask he had maintained for years, was gone. What remained was raw, unfiltered humanity. Namjoon exhaled sharply, running a hand through damp hair, and said, "Then we need to talk, all of us." They gathered in the small dressing room, the kind meant for quick changes, not confessions that could fracture lives. Taehyung leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly, anchoring himself to his own body. His reflection stared back from the mirror, eyes still red, jaw tense, a face older than the one who had left the stage only hours before. "I didn't want you dragged into this," he said quietly, not meeting their eyes. "That's never worked out for you," Hoseok replied softly. Namjoon's posture remained rigid, voice calm but sharp. "HYBE doesn't confront people backstage unless it's serious, so tell us before someone else does." Taehyung exhaled slowly. "There are things I never dealt with," he began, voice careful. "Before, after, trauma doesn't disappear just because you succeed. It waits, it grows teeth." Jungkook's eyes widened, panic flaring. "You're talking like you were about to disappear." "I thought about it," Taehyung admitted. I didn't go anywhere. I'm still here. But I imagined what it would be like if I wasn't, and it scared me enough to keep writing, keep working, keep pretending everything was fine." "Is that what this is about? Your mental health?" Namjoon's voice shook despite his effort to steady it. "Partly," Taehyung said, "but it's also about control. HYBE found out I've been seeing someone off the books, a therapist, one who doesn't report back to the company." The word therapist seemed to open something unspoken, a crack in the invisible wall they had all built around themselves. "They think it's a liability," Taehyung continued, bitterness threading through his words. "They're worried about Leek's image. What might happen if I say something they can't spin?" Hoseok's jaw tightened. "So they cornered you like this?" "Yes," Taehyung admitted quietly, "and I cried." Jungkook nodded, understanding more in a glance than words could convey. "Not a performance," he said softly, "but survival stripped bare." Taehyung's gaze dropped, voice distant. "I told them I was done being managed like a malfunctioning machine. I didn't apologize." "You finally tell the truth, and that's the problem," Namjoon asked incredulously. "They couldn't believe my answer," Taehyung replied. "Because I didn't apologize. I said what I needed to say. I'm done disappearing to make others comfortable." The next days passed in a blur. Meetings were held in hushed tones, news articles skirted the real story, rumors flared online. Taehyung watched it all from his studio, lights dimmed, laptop glowing like an accusatory eye. Every notification was a heartbeat, every silence a shout. One night long past midnight his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "You don't scare easily," a voice said, calm but edged with warning. "Neither do you, apparently," he replied. "This is about containment," the voice continued. "I know," Taehyung said. "That's why I'm not backing down. Someone has to, or this industry will keep breaking people and calling it success." The call ended, leaving him shaking, not with fear but with resolve. The next confrontation wasn't backstage. It was in a boardroom under cold white lights, contracts laid out like weapons, voices raised, boundaries crossed, lines drawn. "You owe this company everything," someone snapped. "No," Taehyung said, voice calm but steady. "I gave this company everything. There's a difference." The tension was palpable. Lawyers, executives, members waiting anxiously. It didn't matter. He was unapologetic, vulnerable, unmovable. By the time he walked out, his legs weak, heart pounding, something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was standing fully as himself. Back in his studio, he played piano, letting the keys carry fractured melodies of truth, pain, and survival. Not for charts, not for approval, just honesty. Outside, rain slammed against the windows, cold and raw. He didn't open his umbrella. The sting reminded him he was alive, and that pain at least was honest. Namjoon appeared, drenched and concerned. "You walked out without saying anything," he said, voice tight with fear and frustration. "That scared the hell out of us." "I needed air," Taehyung replied calmly. "You need more than air," Namjoon said, then softened. "Talk to me. What exactly did they say?" "They told me to stop therapy," Taehyung said flatly. "They said it makes me unpredictable." Namjoon froze. "They what?" "They want control," Taehyung said, voice calm despite everything. "They're afraid I might realize how much of myself I gave away. That's insane, right?" "They can't tell you not to get help," Namjoon snapped, fists clenched. "They already tried," Taehyung said. "And when I said no, they reminded me of clauses, obligations, sacrifices. I'm an asset, not a person to them." "You are not an asset," Namjoon said firmly. "I know," Taehyung replied, tired but resolute. "That's why this is happening." Inside, the members waited tense. The moment Taehyung entered, they were a mix of fear and pride. The statement leaked eventually, raw, unfiltered. His words spread across the internet like wildfire, sparking recognition, relief, and shared vulnerability. HYBE panicked, staff whispered gratitude, and fans responded with empathy. The morning after the statement went public brought a strange, electrified quiet. Taehyung woke on the studio couch, stiff and aching, adrenaline still humming through his veins. The silence felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to falter. Namjoon stood by the window, eyes scanning the city like he was memorizing every detail before something irrevocable changed. "They're calling an emergency board meeting," he said without looking back. "They want you there." Taehyung rubbed his face, fingers brushing against the puffiness under his eyes. "Of course they do," he muttered, the faint humor in his voice dry and humorless. "They're not happy," Namjoon added unnecessarily. Taehyung gave a short laugh. "I didn't do this to make them happy." Namjoon finally turned, studying him carefully. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Ready implied armor, preparation, certainty. Taehyung had none of those. What he had was resolve, a quieter, deeper sort than the explosive determination of yesterday. "I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth," he said. "If that's what they want, they'll be disappointed." The boardroom was colder than he remembered, air conditioned to the point of discomfort. Long, polished tables reflected harsh overhead lights, and faces were set with tight brows and careful neutrality. Lawyers sat with folders open, pens poised like weapons. "Sit," one executive commanded. "This isn't a performance," they said. "No," Taehyung replied calmly. "It's my life." He sat, but the tension didn't ease. You violated protocol, another voice snapped. You released an unapproved statement that contradicts our internal policies. Taehyung met their gaze without flinching. Your internal policies nearly killed me, he said softly. A sharp intake of breath echoed around the room. Someone whispered his name, warning or disbelief tangled together. That is an exaggeration, a lawyer interjected. No, Taehyung said. It's not. He felt strangely detached, observing the storm of voices like he was behind thick glass. When there was a lull, he spoke again, voice steady. You keep talking about risk, but you never talk about cost, the human cost. How many artists burned out quietly so the brand could remain intact? This is not the time, someone began. This is exactly the time, Taehyung interrupted. His heart pounded, but he did not waver. You benefited from my silence, from my pain, and now that I've said it aloud, you're afraid because it doesn't belong to you anymore. Namjoon, seated a few chairs away, felt a surge of pride twist in his chest. This wasn't reckless defiance, he thought. This was someone who reached the end of fear. You have contracts, an executive said coldly. Obligations, Taehyung countered, and I've honored them. I've worked through injuries, insomnia, panic attacks. I've performed when my hands were shaking and my mind screamed to stop. Don't talk to me about obligation. Silence fell again, deeper this time. You leave us very little room to maneuver, the same executive finally said. Good, Taehyung replied. The fallout was swift but uneven. Projects paused indefinitely, meetings canceled without explanation, schedules became vague. The message was clear: pressure without punishment, isolation instead of confrontation. Yet something unexpected happened. Staff began reaching out quietly. A choreographer sent a late-night message thanking him. A junior manager admitted they started therapy because of his words. Even outside the industry, strangers shared their own struggles and relief at finally seeing someone powerful admit vulnerability without shame. Taehyung read each message, chest aching, tears blurring the screen again and again. One evening, the members gathered in the living room. Tension hung thick in the air. Jungkook broke the silence, voice trembling despite attempts to sound strong. Taehyung, I'm proud of you, but I'm scared. Me too, Taehyung admitted quietly. What if this changes everything? Jin asked, voice soft. Taehyung looked around at them, the people who had shared cramped dorms, endless rehearsals, triumph and terror alike. It already has, he said. The question is whether it changes us apart or together. Namjoon's voice, calm and resolute, cut through the uncertainty. We didn't come this far to pretend anymore. The next press conference was unlike any they had ever done. No flashy stage, no scripted jokes, just Taehyung at the microphone, hands steady, eyes clear. I won't answer questions about contracts, he said early, setting boundaries without apology. I'm here to talk about people. A reporter challenged him, voice sharp. Do you think your honesty gives fans unrealistic expectations, romanticizing struggle? Taehyung didn't flinch. Silence romanticizes suffering. Honesty gives people permission to survive. Another asked, are you worried about retaliation? I'm worried about a world where speaking up is more dangerous than staying silent, he said. The press conference ended, and Taehyung stepped away from the podium, feeling drained but intact. Alone in his studio that night, he opened his notebook. For the first time, he didn't need to turn pain into metaphor. He wrote plainly about fear, relief, and the grief of shedding an old self. He thought of his younger self who believed endurance was strength. He wished he could tell him that survival didn't have to hurt this much. The industry didn't transform overnight, but cracks had formed. Conversations started. Taehyung, exhausted and imperfect, stood at the center, not as a hero or martyr, but as someone choosing truth over comfort. Dawn crept through the studio windows. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. The city outside gleamed with neon reflections, restless and alive. mirroring the turbulence of his own mind. Then his phone rang, cutting through the quiet like a blade. He answered steady. "You forced our hand," the voice said, stripped of pretense. "No politeness, no diplomacy," Taehyung replied evenly. "Just pressure. You always had a hand, you're just not used to it being visible. You've triggered consequences. Sponsors are nervous. Other artists are watching." "That's the point," Taehyung said quietly. "This isn't insubordination, it's self-preservation." There was a pause. The voice returned, colder, calculated. "We can't protect you if you continue down this path." "You never protected me," Taehyung said simply. "You protected the image." The call ended abruptly. He stared at the phone for a long moment, then placed it gently on the table. His hands were steady, chest burning. Fear was present, of course, but no longer ownership. It had become a companion, not a master. The members gathered later, tense but loyal. Conversations were messy, filled with raw admissions. Jungkook nearly broke down as he confessed fear of losing Taehyung. "I'm not asking you to follow me into fire," Taehyung said hoarsely. "I'm asking you not to pull me back into the dark." Namjoon finally spoke, voice low and steady. "If you do this, they'll come for all of us." Taehyung nodded. "I know, but if they force me out, at least I leave as myself." One by one, the members shared their truths, their own fears and struggles. Jin admitted how close he had come to burning out. Jungkook confessed terror at existing only for others. Namjoon spoke of the crushing weight of leadership. Taehyung realized his pain was never his alone. Days later, leaks surfaced. Not the sanitized version, not the company-approved draft, but his real words. Stripped of euphemism, raw and unfiltered, they ignited recognition and relief among fans, artists, and industry veterans alike. HYBE issued a neutral statement. "We support our artists' well-being." Taehyung laughed at the irony, sharp and humorless. He wasn't alone anymore. The day after the leaks, the atmosphere inside the company was tense, almost brittle. Taehyung sat in his studio, headphones resting around his neck, staring blankly at the glowing screen of his laptop. Notifications poured in relentlessly, a chaotic river of messages, comments, and shares. Some applauded him for his honesty, some criticized, and some simply questioned, confused by the audacity of someone refusing to conform. Taehyung let them all flow past him. He had learned to focus on what mattered, what was real, what was truth. Namjoon entered quietly, a thermos of coffee in hand. "They're trying to organize a meeting again. Another attempt to get you to recant or at least control the narrative," he said, voice low. Taehyung didn't flinch. "Let them try," he murmured. "I've already crossed the point of no return." The members gathered later in the living room, their faces etched with concern and cautious hope. Jungkook perched on the edge of the couch, fingers tapping against his knee. "What if this spirals out of control? What if they actually try to punish you?" His voice cracked, betraying the fear he usually masked. Taehyung looked at him, eyes steady, unwavering. "Then we face it together. I'm not disappearing quietly anymore. And neither are you." The weight of that declaration hung heavy in the air, grounding them even as tension pressed inward from all directions. Later that afternoon, Taehyung received a direct message from a well-known producer outside the company. It was cautious, coded, but the meaning was clear. Support, understanding, acknowledgement. A ripple of relief spread through him. He wasn't as alone as the company might have hoped. There were allies, people who understood the cost of silence and the power of speaking out. By evening, the boardroom loomed again. This time, it wasn't just executives and lawyers waiting. The members had insisted on accompanying him, a silent show of solidarity. The room was colder than ever, air-conditioned to an almost clinical chill, polished tables reflecting the stark fluorescent lights above. The executives' faces were tighter now, a mix of anger, disbelief, and barely masked apprehension. "You've made a spectacle," one of them started, voice sharp, attempting to reclaim control. "This isn't a spectacle," Taehyung replied evenly. "This is life. Mine. and I refuse to let it be managed like a machine, like a product devoid of humanity." The room fell into a tense silence. Some executives muttered among themselves, shifting papers nervously. Lawyers whispered into their folders, calculating risks, consequences, liabilities. Taehyung observed all of it quietly, an island of calm amid the storm of orchestrated authority. "They're framing this as a philosophical difference," Namjoon whispered to Taehyung from beside him, "which is corporate code for 'they're furious but can't show it openly.'" Taehyung exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. "Good, let them be furious. I'm done pretending their anger can touch me." One executive cleared his throat. "You need to understand the stakes. This could destabilize internal operations, investor confidence, and public perception." "And yet nothing in any of those metrics measures human cost," Taehyung shot back, voice calm but firm. "I've been measured, analyzed, and controlled as if I were data points, but I am a person, not a metric, and the truth doesn't fit neatly into spreadsheets or projections." The room shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, avoiding eye contact. Others frowned, calculating silently. Taehyung felt the weight of authority pressing in, but he did not flinch. The members behind him mirrored his resolve, standing as silent witnesses to his refusal to yield. "What are you proposing, then?" another executive asked, voice clipped, sharp with underlying tension. "I'm not proposing anything," Taehyung said slowly. "I'm declaring that I will speak my truth. I will seek help when I need it. I will not apologize for being human. If that destabilizes you, so be it. But I will not let fear dictate my life anymore." Namjoon felt a surge of pride and relief. Behind Taehyung, Jungkook's hands were clenched tightly in silent support. Jin's eyes glimmered with cautious optimism, and the quiet presence of the other members radiated unwavering solidarity. The executives exchanged looks, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant recognition. Some realized that the narrative they had tried to control was slipping through their fingers. Taehyung had taken the initiative, reclaimed the story, and in doing so, he had forced the company to confront something they often ignored: the humanity of the artists they managed. The day faded into evening, but the tension didn't ease. Taehyung returned to his studio, exhausted but resolute. He sat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. Notes spilled out cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, each one a reflection of the turmoil, resilience, and honesty he had embraced. The music was fractured, raw, and aching, but it was his. As night deepened, his phone buzzed repeatedly. Notifications, calls, messages, all external reminders of the world reacting to his defiance. He ignored them, letting the music anchor him. The members remained close, silently providing strength without intruding, understanding that sometimes presence alone was the most potent support. Eventually, the city outside glimmered under a soft rain, neon reflections dancing on wet streets, echoing the turbulence inside Taehyung's mind. He stepped to the window, rain streaking his face without an umbrella. The cold sting was honest, a reminder that he was alive, that his choices, though difficult, were real. Namjoon appeared beside him, voice low and careful. "You walked out of the boardroom unshaken. Are you certain you're ready for the fallout?" Taehyung turned, eyes clear despite exhaustion. "Ready implies certainty. I'm not certain, but I am resolved. I've crossed the line and I can't go back." The silence stretched between them, filled with mutual understanding and the quiet acknowledgement that whatever came next, they would face it together. The rain continued, relentless but cleansing, much like the truth Taehyung had finally chosen to embrace. Even in the midst of chaos, he felt something rare: clarity. He had confronted the fear, confronted the system, and confronted himself. And though the consequences remained uncertain, he had reclaimed his life, his story, and his voice. The night ended not with triumph or defeat, but with presence, the tangible weight of reality, unfiltered and unapologetic, resting squarely in his hands. And for the first time in years, Taehyung felt the possibility of freedom, fragile but undeniable, stretching out before him. The next morning arrived like a storm cloaked in calm. Taehyung woke on the studio couch, muscles stiff from tension and restless sleep, mind racing through every word spoken, every glance exchanged the previous day. The aftermath of his confrontation with HYBE loomed over him, unseen yet palpable, like a shadow stretching longer than the daylight itself. His phone lay face down on the table, notifications silenced, yet he knew the flood was inevitable. Namjoon entered quietly, carrying a small tray with coffee and toast. He set it beside Taehyung without a word, letting the silence speak first. Finally, Taehyung broke it. "Did they call yet?" His voice was low, hoarse from exhaustion and late-night reflection. "They're calling an emergency board meeting," Namjoon said, tone neutral but tight with concern. "It seems they're trying to figure out the damage control themselves. They didn't expect you to push back." Taehyung leaned back, fingers tangling in his hair. "Good, let them figure it out. I've already decided my path." Later that morning, the members gathered in the studio's small common area. Jungkook's eyes were wary, Jin's posture rigid with worry, and the others fluctuated between concern and quiet support. "What if this changes everything?" Jin asked, voice subdued but edged with fear. Taehyung shook his head gently. "It will change something, yes. But the question is, does it change us apart or together?" His eyes scanned each of them, finding small nods, unspoken promises of solidarity. The room held a tension that was almost physical, heavy in its weight yet tempered by trust. The boardroom awaited later in the day, cold and clinical as ever, filled with polished tables reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights, lawyers poised with pens like swords, and executives masking surprise with professional stiffness. Taehyung walked in with measured steps, the members flanking him silently. He felt the weight of every eye in the room but carried it differently this time. It wasn't fear, it was resolve. "You've created a disturbance," one executive started sharply. "You've disregarded protocol, made statements without approval, and now the narrative is out of our control." "This isn't about protocol," Taehyung replied evenly, voice calm but firm. "This is about life. Mine, and by extension, the lives of those who work under pressure here every day. You measure success in charts and contracts, but how many people silently burn out for the sake of numbers?" Murmurs spread across the room, a mix of discomfort, disbelief, and tension. Lawyers whispered, flipping pages, trying to recalibrate their arguments. Some executives' jaws tightened. Others avoided his gaze. Taehyung met each stare with quiet confidence, unmoved, unyielding. "We want compliance," another executive said, voice clipped, attempting to regain control. "A statement, something manageable, a break framed in acceptable language." "I will not frame my life to be palatable," Taehyung stated plainly. "I will not apologize for living. I will not hide seeking help because it makes others uncomfortable. I will not erase my truth for convenience or image. That is non-negotiable." Namjoon observed from beside him, silent, proud. Jungkook's fists clenched unconsciously, a mix of admiration and concern. The members behind him were no longer spectators. They were participants, witnesses to the courage it took to stand unprotected, unfiltered, unapologetic. The executives exchanged glances, tension and calculation flickering across their faces. They were powerful, used to controlling outcomes, managing narratives, and dictating behaviors. Yet here, Taehyung had shifted the balance. He had taken back the story, refused to perform silence, and in doing so, challenged a system built on compliance and fear. "You're making it difficult," an executive admitted finally. "You could have mitigated damage." "I didn't mitigate my life," Taehyung said softly, yet sharply, letting the words cut through the boardroom air. "And neither should anyone else. I've spent too long enduring in silence, too long letting fear dictate my actions. If that disturbs you, it is because you've measured life in a way I refuse to accept anymore." The boardroom grew silent, the weight of truth pressing down with undeniable clarity. Taehyung's composure was no longer fragile. It was carved from lived experience, vulnerability, and courage. His words resonated beyond contracts and policies. They spoke to the humanity executives often ignored. Hours later, Taehyung returned to the studio. The members were waiting, a tense mix of relief, pride, and anticipation in their eyes. Jin spoke first. "Did you feel it, that shift?" Taehyung nodded. "Yes, and it's just the beginning. They may try to suppress, spin, or punish, but the story is out. The truth is out, and I won't take it back." In the quiet hours of the night, he returned to the piano. Notes flowed freely, raw and fragmented, yet deliberate, reflecting the turbulence, resistance, and newfound liberation he had embraced. The music was his alone, unmediated, a mirror to the soul of someone who had finally reclaimed agency. Outside, the rain continued its relentless rhythm, mirroring the persistence of the truth Taehyung now carried. Neon reflections shimmered on wet streets, mirroring the chaotic mix of exposure, fear, and resilience within him. Each droplet felt like a reminder. The world could not fully control him anymore, not while he stood unshielded, unafraid, and unapologetic. As dawn approached, the city began to stir. Notifications buzzed, messages flooded in, the world reacting in real time to the statement he had finally made. Yet Taehyung remained steady, absorbing it all without surrender, anchored by the knowledge that he had chosen integrity over comfort, truth over convenience. Namjoon appeared once more, standing quietly beside him, the soft light of morning casting long shadows across the studio floor. "You've changed something," he said, voice calm but edged with wonder. "Yes," Taehyung replied, eyes scanning the skyline, "and it's only just begun." The members gathered around, silent yet present, understanding that the ripple effect of this moment would touch more than contracts or boardrooms. It would challenge perceptions, inspire courage, and perhaps, slowly, transform a system that thrived on fear and silence. That night Taehyung lay awake, not with the anxiety of concealment but with the weight of authenticity. He felt exposed, yes, but also alive, present, and undeniably himself. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with obstacles, but it was his road, walked openly, without compromise. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent yet eternal. And inside the studio, Taehyung, exhausted but resolute, understood a profound truth. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let it dictate your life.